Hey everyone. Now that you've got your bag of clay, let's talk about what you need to do to finish your project. I'm lucky and I have a wire tool here. I know that most of you don't have a wire tool, and that's okay. A piece of dental floss or string will work just fine, and you don't actually need one. So I'll try to make this piece without using the wire tool at all. But you'll need to have a fork. Just a standard food fork is fine. And a small container that has some slip in it. You can make slip very easily by taking just a little bit of water in a container like my little bowl here and taking a chunk of clay off of your mound of clay like this. I have just a little bit of clay and putting it into water and let it sit for 15 to 20 minutes and mix it up. It doesn't take 15 or 20 minutes if you continually mix it up, but you want it to be relatively thin in consistency. The slip that I have here is almost like water, and that's what I'm looking for when I work with slip. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. Hopefully they stay rolled up. And the first thing I need to do when I'm making my piece is I need some clay to make a base with. So this clay has been run through an industrial sized pug mill and has been de-aired, but the pug mill has a corkscrew style auger inside of it that spins around in a circle. So I am going to use the wire tool for 1 second to demonstrate something. And that is, if you take a slice of your clay and you start to bend it, you may be able to see these small spirals that are in the clay body itself. So you don't want to just grab a piece of clay and use this as your base. You'd like to wedge it first. And the easiest way to wedge, I think right now, is to grab the clay, twist it in half, smack it together. You need to do this at least 3 times. Now, if you have a card table or something like that, that's wonderful. I have this standing table here, this bar table. My table is not stout enough that I can wedge on top of the table very easily in a standard wedging technique, spiral wedging, but I'll give it a shot. If you have a card table, you may be able to get away with this a little bit. It may fold on you though. So it doesn't take very much wedging to get the clay ready to go. Just to get these spirals that are inherent to the clay taken care of is important. Then the next thing that we're going to do is make a slab base, and I'm going to focus on making a small cup just like we made in the beginning of the semester with the coil and slab mugs that we made. So I'm going to take a little bit of this clay and I've just twisted it off, and I'm going to throw it down more or less vertically onto the table, and I'm noticing that I'm choosing a new location on the table each time to throw the clay down so that I'm not throwing the clay onto a wet area and it sticks like this. If you drag the clay across the table surface so it bounces and stretches, that's what you're looking for in this process. And I'm moving the clay around the table on purpose to try to get it to not stick to my really smooth, shiny table. Oopa. Okay, so I have a slab here and a little bit of extra clay. I'm lucky and I have a needle tool, but I'm not going to use it. I'll use the fork. And I'm going to cut a circle out of the clay. Something like that. So now I have my clay circle. I'm going to take time in between each of the steps to make sure that I'm not leaving a clay residue behind that's going to interfere with my working. This is going just fine to roll this out, but I've taken the scrapped clay from that slab, and now I'm working on rolling it out into a coil. What I'm going to be doing is starting with my fingers together, and I'm going to do this one-handed so I can demonstrate it. But I'm going to be rolling backwards and forwards on the clay with my fingers together. And as the clay stretches out, I'm going to start spreading my fingers out to distribute pressure on the clay more evenly. But I'm looking for a coil that's about the thickness of my thumb is a good starting place. So here's my thumb and here's the coil. And I'm going to roll it out hither and yon. Now, if your coil gets a little bit flat and starts to fold on itself, that's not the end of the world. You can work with those coils anyways. To attach clay to clay, I'm going to make sure that I score the clay very deeply and aggressively. You want these score marks to be deep, and it doesn't matter the orientation of them. And this is where a fork is a better tool than a needle tool, because you can leave more score marks at a time. You want the score marks to be irregular and relatively deep. And because the clay, this clay is the same consistency as my big block of clay and the coil that I just made, I don't really need to use slip in between these two processes. But on this base layer, I'm going to use a little bit of slip here. So this is not necessary to get the clay to stick, and I'm not using very much slip at all. Just a little bit of water, and I have an old toothbrush that I'm using to distribute the slip. From there, I'm going to flatten my coil a little bit because my coil is the thickness of my thumb, which is a little bit thick. I'm going to pick this up and begin applying it to the slab. Now, this is really important. You do not want the clay to go around the outside of your slab. You want the clay instead to be on top of the slab. So this works for all of the bases that you'll be making for the Greco-Roman pots. This works for other pieces as well, like slab mugs or coil mugs. I'm going around the pot and I'm trying to push the clay of the coil down and into the score marks that are there. So now I'm going to come through again, now that I've got the extra clay removed, and I'm going to be pushing down and into the slab as much as I can without deforming the clay. So I'm pushing down and in all the way around, and then after you have it pushed down and in, you'll end up with this residual markings from the scoring on the inside of the pot. What you want to do is come through and smooth those score marks out. Otherwise, they'll retain food and other yuckies from the process. The outside of the pot, this is sticking to the table a little bit, so I've got to be gentle in how I remove it. The outside of the pot, it's very important to now blend these two areas together. So I'm using an upward motion at the moment to blend the base of the clay to the coil, the first coil that I have. And I'm just trying to rough in a general shape. Now this is the start of something like a slab or a coil mug, but it could very easily be the base of a Greco-Roman pot. And we'll talk about how to increase or decrease the scale of your pot or the width of the pot here in just a second. But I'm smoothing all of the clay in, and you just want a rough general shape that's going to be useful for your final project, whatever you have in mind. Now, if I need the clay to go outward, I'm going to pinch the clay and spin it, and pinch the clay gently, and I'm going to pinch all the way around the object to make the clay flail outward gently. If you need the clay to come inward, just the opposite is true. If you come through and you pinch together and pinch together and pinch together all the way around the pot, and you keep doing that with an inward motion with your hands gently, the walls will come inward. You have three general options when you're applying a coil to another coil, and we'll talk about this here. Now, if you get real close to this, this is what I'm talking about with the clay folding over itself. That's not going to cause a problem in your final project as long as you're paying attention to it. But you have three general options when you're applying a coil. The first is to apply the coil directly on top of the existing coil. Another option is to apply it just to the outside. And I'll do this on the back side so you can see it a little bit more easier. First option is directly on top of. The second option is to the outside. And this is good if you need the shape to flail outward as you're building. And if you need the shape to come inward, you can always take that coil and apply it to the inside wall. So that's one way of controlling whether your pot goes straight up and down, outward a little bit, or inward a little bit. So I'm going to set this aside for just a moment. And the other thing that'll become really important as we're working is when you're working, you want to make sure that you keep your mass of clay covered. And I oftentimes like to just keep the bag up like that when I'm working. There's something called the refractionation column, which is the clay as it releases its moisture will fill the bag up with moisture in the air. And so long as your bag is higher than your clay won't really dry out. But you can always close the bag and turn it upside down on top of the extra plastic to keep the clay wet. So I'm going to take a lump of clay here, twist this in half, and I'm going to take this clay here that's been hand wedged a little bit, and I'm going to roll out another coil. So I always start when I'm making a coil with one hand, massaging the clay into a big snake or coil. And then when the clay gets too big for just one hand, that's when I apply the second hand. And I work stretching the clay outward. Again, what's the thickness that I'm looking for? The thickness of my thumb. So it can be a little bit thicker than that if you want it to be. The building goes a little faster when your coils are a little on the thicker side. But if they're too thick, your pot walls will be too thick as well, and that will prevent them from being able to be fired evenly. So now I'm going to just cheat and use my little tool to cut this coil a little bit. A nail works fine. A pocket knife will be fine. A butter knife will be fine. You can use any of those. I could have done the same job with my fork. But now, I'm going to apply a second coil to this one. Because this clay has just been applied and is soft, I'm able to apply the second coil to the clay without scoring the pot. So as I'm working, I'm pushing my finger down, my left thumb down, creating this little pattern that maybe you can see if you come around the table. I'm pushing this pattern into the clay, and I'm going to spin the pot and continue pushing downward in this way, which does two things. It flattens the coil that I'm working with and helps adhere one layer to the next. So now I'm going to come through again, and it's very important at these stages that you really consider the inside of the pot. I have some score marks that are still visible. You want to make sure that you're rounding those areas and smoothing them so that you're not going to entrap any food particles or leave big spaces for air voids or any of that. Glazing will help, but you want to make sure that you're coming through while you can still reach the bottom and interior of the pot to really smooth those areas. On the outside of the pot, I'm going to lift upward, smoothing the coils together. And you don't have to, there's no hard and fast rule about whether you go up or whether you go down on the inside or the outside. But a good general working practice is that if you're going down on one side, say the interior, that you're lifting up on the opposite side to blend the clay together. You can go down and down. There's nothing in the rule book that says that that does not work. It does work fine. But I have found that it's better to try to interlock the layers by going down on one side, the interior, let's say, and up on the outside. I'm trying to make sure that my joints, like I have a joint right here, I'm trying to make sure that I don't have a seam of joints running straight up the pot, so I've offset this joint from the joint below. Here's the joint below. And I'll blend that together again. And I'll blend this together. Trying to keep uniform wall thickness all the way around. And in general, you're going to be working on these pots in multiple sessions. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to build the entirety of a pot in just one session. You're probably going to want more than that. So here I have the outline of the pot that Laura made earlier. And you can see that in this case, the clay that's here needs to come outward a little bit to meet the profile of the object. So I'm going to make sure that I am curving the pot a little bit by pinching the pot, spinning it, pinching the pot, spinning it, pinching the pot, spinning it, pinching the pot. And over time, that will kick the walls outward, growing in shape. Now this pot, as it is a little bit wobbly and wiggly. If you let it set up without plastic covering, you want it to be out, if you're working in the sun, outside in the sun or even just in the open air, each session can be about 15 to 20 minutes apart from one another. That'll give you enough time for the clay to dry out and the structural strength to increase enough that you won't have this wobbly aspect to the clay. If you keep going and the pot's not ready for it, what will end up happening is gravity will affect the pot and it'll start to fall downward. You want to make sure that your base layers are nice and firm, relatively strong, before you move on. So I'm in a sheltered building here. So what I would recommend for this particular object is covering it with plastic. I have a piece of plastic here, and I'm going to drape the plastic over the pot fairly loosely. I'm just going to set it over the pot like this. And this will extend my working time quite a bit. So in 3 to 4 hours, I may be able to come back to the pot to continue working on the object. If there's no plastic, you don't want to go more than about half an hour before you're able to work. And work sessions can be up to 24 hours apart from one another, so long as you are covering the piece with plastic in between. So if the piece is covered with plastic, it becomes very important to score the next layer. If this is already firmed up and is a little bit on the stiff side, you want to make sure that you are scoring the pot, which looks like this, very aggressively on that edge that you're going to be adding to. And a fork is probably the best tool for this, honestly. And then I'm going to take a little bit of my slip and apply slip to the outside of this scored area. And it does not take very much slip. You can add too much, which is more problematic than not adding enough in my experience. So I've added slip all the way around. I'll take the next coil and begin pushing it onto the layer below. If your coil's not long enough to be able to reach all the way around the pot, that's not the end of the world. You just grab another piece, another coil, and begin blending that onto the score marks as well. So it does not matter how much clay you have in a layer. I'm just going to take a little bit more of this, jam it in there, and begin blending these layers together. So again, I'm going through the inside of the pot using my thumb. Now I'm using an index finger. Pinching together slightly to make sure that the wall thickness is uniform. Index finger. Take the extra clay off. Smoothing together. And then on the outside of the pot, you can choose, if you so desire, to leave the lines of each coil, this vertical line or horizontal line that's right here, you can choose to leave that on the pot if you so desire, but it generally makes a stronger pot if you come back and blend that together with the area below. So I can't actually see what I'm doing. If I was serious about this, I would probably be sitting down. I'm going to pull over a little chair and get to an area where you can ergonomically see the pot and work on the pot at the same time. And I'm just blending this area in. Now, we do not have scrapers or rib tools. This is a metal rib. This is a metal rib, and this is a plastic rib. In ideal circumstances, I would be coming through and smoothing the inside of the pot now with a rib tool. If you don't have a rib tool, it's not the end of the world. If you have an old library card, or in my case, I happen to have an old debit card. Yep, this is my old one, not my current one. The plastic in these cards work exceptionally well to come through and blend the layers together. So I'm going to come through and blend the interior of the pot. And pots, this is just a reminder, pots are a lot like people. The inside and what's going on the inside is oftentimes more important than what's going on the outside. If you do not have a good foundation on the inside of the pot, you're going to struggle with the object all the way through the creation process. Kind of like people. If you're not well centered and put together well, you're going to have a hard time navigating. And the little bit of extra clay that I've accumulated on the card, I can either put into my little slip container, or because it's soft, I can just ball it back up. the ball of clay that I've been working with. I'm going to take a break here because I'm worried that this is going to become gravity affected and start coming downward. The height of the pot and the width of the pot are things that you want to consider before you put the pot away, because once you put the plastic over it or you allow it to sit and set up, when the pot is more firm, you are not going to be able to adjust the in and out of the clay, the width and height of the clay very easily. So before you set the pot away, you want to make sure that you are close, at least, to the profile of the object that you're trying to create. So that should do it for now. Please comment on the videos if you have any questions, and we'll go from there. Right now, here's a credit card, effectively, and here's the size of this particular object. We are shooting in our final pots to be between 12 and 14 inches. They can be smaller than that, but if you start going to 16 inches or more, you're probably going to run out of clay. So keep that in mind. 12 to 14 inches allows you enough clay to create at least one of these Greco-Roman forms, as well as a number of smaller handmade, handcrafted pots. So because this clay is soft, I'm going to put it right back into the bag, right on top of the bag, and I'm going to seal it up and lay it over on its side to seal the bag and keep all of the clay moist. Keeping your working clay moist is probably the most important aspect of what it is that we're doing. And the profile of your pot before you come to a rest is also very important. Uniform wall thickness will help with the pot drying and firing. And there's a finished example of this pot right over here.